So anyway, welcome everyone to this Richmond Planning Commission meeting of July 10th, 2024. It's a replacement for the meeting that we didn't have on the 3rd because that didn't seem like a very good day to have a Planning Commission meeting. So thank you everyone for being flexible enough to reschedule it till today. We also have another one next week, which is the public hearing on the neighborhoods. But tonight we're going to deal with some other issues. We'll look at the agenda and adjust that first as our first item. And there are basically two items on this agenda. Hopefully we'll divide the time in half. The first one is the trying to make some progress, move forward with buttermilk. We really need to do that, and the Jolina court zoning amendments. And the second one is to look at the progress that we have made on thinking about moving the playground up onto the grassy knoll to get it out of the way of flooding. So, does anyone want to make any adjustments to this agenda?
Hey, Virginia, as Chris, I'd like to add an additional item of talking about just process within the commission and steps to take to avoid future lack of quorum situations.
Okay, can we do that at the end, or what are you thinking?
Well, I mean, I think it can be dealt with pretty quickly. I think it might be better to do it up front. If it waits till the end, you know, things have a tendency to fall off the end of the agenda if we leave them till last. But that's my preference.
Okay. All right. So maybe we'll do it under public comment on non-agenda items, or we can talk about it right now.
Okay. Well, as you know, sort of leaning into my role as co-chair here, sort of paying attention to process. And I think, as everybody knows, we had a situation where we had a publicly warned meeting that we failed to have a quorum at and had to cancel. We received, I think, some well deserved criticism from the public for that. And I think it's worth taking some time and effort to see what we can do to avoid that situation in the future. It has happened in the past also. So I think there are things that we can do to help mitigate that. One is I did notice that you put in a note in the Front Porch Forum, you know, recruiting new members, and I'd like to ask the rest, and myself and the rest of the commission, to also play a role in that, and to maybe put an item on the agenda for the next meeting where people can talk about conversations they've had with potential recruits, efforts that they've made to reach out to potential new commission members. Because I think that does make it easier. The more members that we've got, you know, within reasonable limits, the easier it is to reach a quorum. So that was the first thing I was going to propose. And then on the other side, I think maybe we need to have some rules about acceptable numbers of unannounced absences from planning commission meetings. Nobody's perfect. Circumstances intervene, but I think we need to put some limits on the number of unannounced absences. I would suggest, you know, that with one unannounced absence, commission members get put on probation. With two in a calendar year, that they get asked if they are really prepared to meet the requirements of serving on the commission. That's just my immediate proposal as a straw for people to discuss.
Okay, well, if we didn't have two vacancies on the commission, it's, you know, we probably need all the members we have, absences or not, but anyone want to talk about it right now, or do people want to think about it and talk about it at the next meeting when we schedule some time for it? Or Chris has got some ideas. Maybe other people will have some ideas if they've thought about it. I guess I'd rather try to move on with our
Can I make
items.
a quick comment about that?
Sure, go ahead, Ian.
I mean, would it be helpful to have a person on this commission that's responsible for making sure that we know if we're gonna have a quorum or not? And have it not be you with all of the other responsibilities that you have currently?
I can only tell you that it is impossible to do that, to
Okay.
make sure
Or
that
to
we have a quorum.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
can you make sure that people are going to come? You know, you can
Yeah.
remind them. We can
Well, that's what I
remind
mean,
them,
I guess, like,
send them emails, call them on the phone. You can do that sort of, you know, and I try to do it to a certain extent,
Yep.
but we do expect the members, I mean, to Chris's point, we expect the members of the commission to know when the meetings are and to come to them, you know?
Sure.
That's like the basic responsibility. So
Yeah.
there's no way that I can tell to ensure that
No,
there is a quorum.
right.
There just isn't.
Yeah.
So people
I guess what
will
I'm
be
saying
absent.
is, like, if you want to designate someone, like, I'd be happy to do it, to like go through the contact list a couple days before the meeting, just try to get a feel, make a friendly reminder to people and find out if there's a possibility someone's not going to make it.
I think that's an
Great.
incredibly generous offer, Ian.
Yeah. You're
And if,
volunteering and
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah,
If you
so I
wanna
would
do
need
that,
to
that's
get
great.
the contact information from people if they're not, if they're willing, you know, don't want to invade anybody's privacy or, but I'll send an email out. If that, is that okay for me to send an email to the commission in that
Yes.
regard? Because without being in violation of any public meeting.
you're not
Yes.
initiating a conversation, you're doing a request for information.
Okay.
Yep.
I'll do that.
Here.
I want to remind the commission that there are the planning commission rules of procedures. If you miss 3, the vice chair or the chair can request that person resign. So I would brush up on the rules and procedures, which is on the ordinances on the website. So I'll give you a pretty good idea of how we're supposed to deal with all this.
Okay.
All right, Ian, you're the
I'll do that.
communication secretary here, reminding people. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else want to weigh in? Okay, and so maybe we can have a slightly longer conversation after people have thought about it. Maybe not at our next meeting, but at the meeting after that, depending on how long the public hearing goes at the next meeting. And, you know, if anybody knows anyone who's interested, go ahead and contact them. I don't know that, you know, I can think of anybody that I know who is interested in doing this kind of work.
Excuse me, Virginia.
Yeah, Mark.
Could I just interrupt quickly? You have to
Yeah.
forgive me. I'm having trouble with my computer, so I'm on my phone and my laptop right now, but I'm not getting sound out of my laptop. But anyways, what I was wondering is if Keith could forward those rules of procedures to the entire committee. I think it'd be worth brushing up on. Not
Yep.
sure. Have you got them handy that you could bring them up and send them along, or a
You are
link that I
brilliant.
should follow?
Exactly what I'm doing right now as we speak.
Awesome. Thank you, Keith.
Okay, anyone else want to weigh in on this topic? Great. All right, so luckily we have a quorum tonight. That's good. And might even have Allison if she doesn't have to deal with her roof leaking. Okay, so we'll proceed with our agenda as adjusted there. Anybody else want to make a public comment about either of these things that is currently on the agenda? that is not on the agenda, besides these things that are on the agenda. Okay, not seeing any hands. We'll move on to item number 4 on our agenda, which is to review and accept the minutes of June 5th. Did anyone have any comments, additions, corrections they'd like to make on those minutes? Okay, not seeing any hands, hearing no corrections, we will accept those minutes into the record as written. Okay. I guess one brief other note to follow up on Chris's note is that I had said I would send out the documents in Word form that are on the Planning Commission webpage. They're put on the webpage in PDF form because we're not inviting people to adjust those documents off the webpage. But if anybody, I had asked originally if anybody wanted those documents in Word form so you could make notes on them or edit them to send in comments. I didn't have any response from that, so this time I didn't send the documents out in Word form. Does anybody care? Does anyone want the documents in Word form, or are you happy to look at them on the web page?
And I would add that the intent of the Word form is for you to manipulate them on your own time, because we have them as PDFs on the website. That's the purpose.
Okay, so I'm not really seeing anybody interested in getting them in Word form, so that will be one step less to do, to send them all out in Word form. You can get them off the website in the PDF form.
And I would say that doesn't preclude you for asking for them in Word form either, though. We can certainly can do
Yeah.
that. So.
Or, you know, any individual who wants one in Word form because they would like to do some editing on their own.
Word.
Keep the comments down. Okay. So, not hearing any comments about that. We'll move on. We'll go to number 5, which is to look at the most recent draft of Jolina Court zoning amendments, including removal of the commercial requirement and density increase. This is actually the last document. It's several months old. The last document that we reviewed, we didn't have any significant comments that were made at that time, so I brought that document back. People's feelings, including mine, might have changed somewhat since this document was put together as a draft. We can start by saying that Buttermilk's application for the rental revolving loan fund was not approved, so they're not going to get that. So we need to just proceed on as we were proceeding. Before then, taking into consideration what they might have said on that application form.
Just a minute. I just want to make the point that it was known from the outset that they were not going to get accepted this time around. We were told that by the agency, and they asked that the submission go in anyway in order to be placed well for future rounds. Now, we don't know what those are going to be. We don't know what the timing is, but there's nothing unexpected about their not getting accepted this time. And there's no reason to believe that they won't get accepted in future rounds.
Yeah, and they have responded by saying that they're not going to apply again, for sure, even if there are future rounds, until all of the components are in place, which makes sense. The components really weren't in place this time, so that's something that we can think about doing. For the future. So depending on what happens now with them, it may either be with Buttermilk or with some other project. We assume that Buttermilk is interested in proceeding. We haven't heard otherwise before the next round of the rental revolving loan fund comes into being. So do you have any more comments about that, Chris? Or
Well, only that, no, I think you did a good job of summarizing it. And I think the only thing that I'd say is that the interests, or certainly my interest in the rental revolving loan fund, but I think also Buttermilk's as well, was that it would provide support for affordable housing approach that does not require acceptance of in the rental revolving loan fund or program like that in order for a developer to implement themselves. So, and I think that that's captured in the documents that got put out for this meeting generally, but I just wanted to stress that there's nothing about not getting accepted in this round that would prevent us from asking Buttermilk or Buttermilk instituting themselves aspects of that same approach.
okay. Bonnie. You are muted.
Yep, sorry, flailing with my fingers. Yeah, I'm curious if there has been other work done to figure out if there are other ways to finance something like what I hope is a priority or a priority of the Planning Commission to have some affordable options. I think that there may be other funding sources. I did a quick little look in preparation for tonight, just because I was curious, because I saw in the notes that loan hadn't been accepted. And I don't know about this, I'm not an expert, but there's something called the bylaw modernization grants that are currently available from the state. There are like over 50, 60 different municipalities that have applied for these through the state, and they're basically to help increase housing opportunities. And the regional planning commissions have people designated to help communities to access this money. So I just think that, this one possible funding opportunity doesn't seem to be there right now, but there may be others. And I'm curious if there's been any thinking about that.
Well, as I understand it, the bylaw modernization is for municipalities to modernize their bylaws. It's not for developers. Is that correct, Keith? The bylaw?
Yes, that's my understanding, is to modernize your amendments or your bylaws with your zoning. But I will say, Bonnie, that the Housing Committee is focusing on that aspect, specifically subsidized housing. Not necessarily housing that's affordable or affordable housing, because that's an umbrella term. But subsidized housing is the path they are going down right now. And they're going down pretty heavy with that, but they only meet once a month. But they are definitely pursuing that approach, is to look into, and what I term setting the environment to attract a developer that would be amenable to putting in subsidized housing or affordable housing for that matter. And there are a myriad of programs out there. Absolutely. I mean, you're right. They require matches, but that's something that the developer has to go and do. But we want to set that environment, and we want to get that discussion going, and it is going on. It's ongoing with the Housing Committee, so they can get a doc to the select board and maybe put some money away for affordable housing, or be able to support applications for developers and such and such. And we've been pretty deep with Heinsberg in that, because they're much farther along than we are. So we've been tapping into their expertise. So it is definitely a pretty hot priority for the Housing Committee.
Yeah, it looks like Williston's heavy into that too, and it seemed to have a lot to do with density, which I know that your conversation tonight is about changing the density, and perhaps that's going to help. But I'm just concerned that, we don't have anything in place that's going to require some, percentile under market rate.
Right.
And,
So that's inclusionary zoning, and that's a tool. I mean, that's definitely a tool. It's not a panacea, but I mean, it is a tool. No doubt about that. I don't think we're ready for that with these folks at this stage, but that's my opinion. Okay, so certainly something that the housing committee can look into, and I know that we have discussed inclusionary zoning.
okay.
Yeah.
And I would just add one more thing. There's a great document from Alex Weinhagen from Heinsberg. And it's an email that he sent that responded to one of Bard's questions about inclusionary zoning. And that's really eye-opening. And that's attached on the previous meeting, I believe. It's there. And if it's not, just I could shoot it to you too, if you would like.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. And that will be a longer process than considering the application that we've got going in front of us at the moment. So. Okay, any other points? So I think where we are with this buttermilk situation is, first of all, Chris and I and Bard and David Sander and Keith met with a long-term commercial lender to get some more background on the situation. I came away, I don't know, Chris, you can speak to how you came away with this, but the idea that it is a very challenging development market for commercial properties. The construction costs are incredibly high, the interest rates are high, and so it's actually very difficult for the forecastable income to actually pay off the mortgage. So the banks don't want to lend money to these projects. And in the last month, since we talked about this before, there have been a number of articles that have stressed that mortgages are being foreclosed on for these multifamily housing projects. Developers can't make their money back. So I think we need to keep that in mind, that it is an extremely challenging market, and if we want a project here at all, Buttermilk Building 2, we're going to have to be really careful about reducing in any way the forecastable income. So, and trying to make it possible for them to actually get funding and actually to continue to pay off their loan once they have funding. So anyway, back to what we have going. I think we pretty much all agreed that the commercial requirement can go. That's another area that is very challenging right now. Those business residential mixes. And then we want to come to the point of density. So in the rental revolving loan application, they stated 45 units as
Virginia,
planned. Yeah,
I actually did have a couple thoughts that I wanted to
sure.
share from
Yeah,
that.
go ahead.
So this is for folks who know him, Wright Preston, who's long time resident in town and active in town government, and also worked as a commercial lender until he retired. And I thought it was a very interesting conversation. As Virginia said, confirmed a lot of things that impressions that we had already about short-term and long-term shifts, I think, in the market for commercial real estate in Vermont. But one of the things that Wright said that surprised me a little bit was that it's actually not so much the interest rates, at least not anymore. The interest rates are higher now than they have been, but they're not really high for commercial builders if you look over like a 20-year span, and he says, in his professional career, the current interest rates are not that not particularly outrageous. But the point being that let's say that the Fed changes direction next year, that doesn't solve the problem, right? So this is a more structural issue. It's deeper, and the idea that we're going to have a significant commercial components to any kind of development on Jolina Court is probably not realistic. I don't know that it was realistic at the time that the requirements were put in place, but it's less so now. So I think that was something that I took away from that was particularly interesting.
Right. Okay. Challenging. So the fact is, you're better able to meet your financial commitments if you have more units. So this is the question of increasing the density. Also, if we remove the commercial requirement from the first floor, there will be space there. What are you going to do with that space? Put in more units. So the current density is 15 units per acre. We've talked about 3 numbers. Nobody has suggested any other numbers to talk about. That's why we're still talking about these 3 numbers. One is going to 18 units per acre, which would give them an additional 9 units to help them finance this. Going to 20 units per acre would give them an additional 15 units, which brings them up about to 45 or 46, which was the number of units that they used in their application for the rental revolving loan fund. Or the number that they are interested in, which is the same number as is in the downtown, which we know that Mark doesn't think is a very good number, but that's the number that is there in the downtown district of 24 units per acre, which would give them an additional 27 units.
There only
have
because
seen-
it was pre-existing, right? We want to reemphasize that. You keep throwing it out there like that's a standard thing that the community is agreed with and we propose, but it was only done because there was already 24 units per acre and we wanted to allow them to be compliant. Like I keep emphasizing that, and I keep seeing it thrown into summaries and documents as if well, that's a perfectly normal number for what Richmond residents expect density should be, and it isn't. It's a little frustrating, but
Well, it's a number that we, the Planning Commission, agreed upon, and it is in the zoning currently, so it is real in that sense. It's a real number.
yes, it is real, but it's not real because it was a developed property that we said, let's go there to this number. It's there because it was pre-existing from 100 years ago, and we just wanted to make life easier for somebody who already had that density requirement, so that they didn't have to go with the DRB every time they changed a doorknob. That's the only reason why.
Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, I would have to disagree with that that's the only reason. That's a good number for a density, a downtown
I remember
density.
being there when that decision was made and why that decision was made. And that was the sole reason why that decision was made. We didn't increase it to 30 units per acre because we wanted even more density, and we didn't go to less because they were already at that density. It's this one and only reason why there's 24 unit per acre zoning in any Richmond district.
Okay, well, that I would have to disagree with you on, but we don't want to spend any more time on it right now.
Okay.
It's Allison
I
trying
don't
to
know
get
how
hold of
you
it.
can disagree
But-
with that.
So, we're going to have to disagree with you on that, but what is the case is that is a number that Buttermilk has suggested they would like to have for a density. And so we have to deal with that fact. And it is the density currently in our zoning regulation of the neighboring density, the neighboring
They
district.
would probably like to get 30 units per acre if we'd give it to them, or 40.
Yeah, well, I haven't heard anybody suggest any other numbers except for those numbers. So if you want to suggest a different number, I think, you're certainly welcome to do it. I think we need to make some progress and we need to decide. There's not much more information that we can get on this particular project? I don't think. I think we've gotten the information that we need, and we just need to make some kind of a decision about how many additional units we want to give them. So those are the three numbers that have been suggested for an increase in the base density. Does anyone want to talk about more about that except Mark saying 24 is not a real number?
Well, I want to make just one point about it, and I'm not taking a stand on any particular level, but I think it's probably not possible for the Planning Commission. Well, here, let me step back for a second. I think what you said, Virginia, about the project not being financially viable under the current, what is currently allowed. Because remember, there's nothing preventing Buttermilk from building now other than their reported financial constraints. You know, the current level of density, they say, and the commercial requirement prevents them from a financially viable project. So what we're talking about are taking steps to increase the profitability of the project for the developer. Yeah, and I have no problem with that. But we don't have any way of determining what the minimum level of density that we could allow that would make that happen. Part of it is because they don't even know. I mean, Josie told me that they have no intention of breaking ground until a year from now at the earliest, and the conditions will be different then. So, you know, I think we really need to make this decision based on what we think is right for the town in terms of density, and not try and figure out Buttermilk's business for them. And like I said, I don't really have a strong feeling myself about what that level should be. I mean, I think there probably is one that's too high, but I don't feel the same constraints maybe that Mark does.
Yes. So,
Oh, I'm not sure I have constraints, and it certainly sounded like in our meeting with the select board that they were open to a pretty high density. It just bothers me that we're throwing that number out there as a pre-established community approved number. That was my only pet peeve, and it's a silly one, and I apologize.
so personally, I'm headed towards the middle number of 20 units per acre, which gives them the 45 units that they had stated in their application for the revolving loan fund was the number of units that they were going to have. This is before the Planning Commission had done anything. 15 additional units, they would have 15 additional units, which they could certainly fit in. They were planning to put in an additional 24 units into the building of the same footprint, building number 2, with the same footprint. They would be smaller units. This 20 is kind of a compromise number to me. And then the other piece of it, besides increasing the base density, is we could offer them the density bonus units for things that the town feels they want. You know, the trade-off is kind of the more you increase the base density, the less likely they are to take the density bonuses. But on the other hand, I really feel like we need to give them some options to take to the bank. You know, just as Chris said, we don't really know what the minimum density is that they need. But if we gave them some options, saying you can just take the space density increase, simple, straightforward, get rid of the commercial, take the space density increase, maybe to 20 units, whatever, forget the bonus units. If you want to get another 12, let's say, units, then you can do the bonus density, which is a separate document in your packet. And the things that we have talked about are the workforce housing, which is moderate income without the affordability component. It's just a scheme of keeping the rent at a certain level. Senior housing, or accessible or equipped, adaptable, whatever we want to call it, making some of those units And then I put in one for discussion because it had been talked about both by the select board and planning commissioners about offering leased parking to other businesses or the town. The leases would be set up by Buttermilk and they would get the money for it. So it would probably pay for itself, but they would be required to be offered. So that would be a way that we could say we're offering you a choice. You can take the base density and go with that amount, or you can take that and you can, if you think it'll fly with the bank, you can take some of these kind of lightweight bonus units. So I think, Ian, you're up.
I agree with everything you just said, Virginia. Except, trying to come up with a number is kind of difficult because we don't have any like hard guardrails for the things that we're talking about. And I kind of feel like, something we're trying to achieve is to get as much housing as possible right now in town without having a adverse impact on the neighborhoods and congestion and all those other factors. And I know that there's a traffic study that's been referred to already. And there's some talk that they're gonna reevaluate that with the grocery store project that's coming up in that neighborhood.
Yes, the town is going to do a traffic study of that intersection. That is not going to tell us that's not going to tell us whether we need 31 units or 45 units or 54 units. That traffic study is not going to tell us that.
Oh.
It's going to tell us what we can do with that intersection to make it work as best we can with the traffic, all the through traffic, the grocery store traffic, all of the other things that fit into that. I mean, one of the things about the intersection that you can think is that, well, okay, if they take less units and no density bonus units, at least there will be a few less cars going into the intersection. I mean, that's the whole point of compromising, is that maybe you get something either way if you go in the middle. Anyway, go ahead, Ian. Sorry.
All right, that's okay. I guess what I'm trying to say is like, it's hard for me to, I would, lean in the direction of getting as many units in there as possible, like I said, without having a negative impact on the people that neighbor the property, or at least you could say that's impossible. There's going to be a negative impact on them because it's going to be a change, but yeah, I guess I'm leaning towards the 24, unless someone can tell me how is that going to be different than 20.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't, and without saying, I don't really care about the profitability for the developers. I'd like to see them be successful in whatever they do, but I guess my priority is get as much housing as possible. So that's why I guess I'll go with a higher number, unless it can be shown to me how that going higher is going to make it worse for anybody.
Mm-hmm. And would you just go with a straight density increase? Yeah. Base density increase, simple and clean cut and
no bonuses.
Yeah. Okay. I think Chris, you were next.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, I actually want to speak in favor. It's interesting because I think ending up at around the same number sounds about right to me. But the way that I would think we would make most sense to get there is for an approach that maximizes the bonus density aspect and minimizes just the straight addition to density. So why? Well, and this has to do with more sort of negotiation strategy than anything else. We're starting at a point where, as I said before, we have an agreement with the developer and the developers come back to us and said, well, that doesn't work for us anymore. We want to change the terms of that agreement. So that creates an opportunity for both sides to get more of what they want. Now, one thing that we know that the town would like in there is more commercial development, but we decided that's not an option. And I agree with that. I don't have a problem with that. But there are other things that we've identified that we want that the developer could give to us in return for increased density, such as some more below market units or parking spots. If the question I wanted to ask about that too is whether we've done the legal review on that or not, but that's
No,
another question for okay.
we have no idea whether that is even possible.
Right. Okay. So the way I feel about it is, why wouldn't we build this into a density bonus type of approach, maybe more lenient than the one that was proposed, instead of 1 per 1, maybe it's 1 per 2 or something like that, one affordable unit so 2 density bonus units for every affordable unit, but have the weight of the increase be from that mechanism as opposed to just a direct increase in density. And what that's more, thinking like an economist, which unfortunately I find myself doing a lot, is that ends up with a more equitable share of the benefits to be created. The more they get what they want, the more we get what we want, as opposed to just increasing the profitability of the project, by fiat from a decision that we would make or propose to the select board.
Okay, Mark? Hello, Mark?
Hello.
Oh, hello. You were muted.
I apologize.
You're on the phone, right? Are you on the phone?
No,
No.
now I'm back on my computer. I got it
Okay, back on
sorted,
your computer.
but,
Okay.
I did get, and basically where I'm at is, if you raise up the density to a point where they're satisfied with moving forward without it, there's not going to be any density bonuses. So I just ask that the commission think about keeping that at it is, and then using density bonuses to increase those levels to where they are. And I definitely would like to think that first of all, I don't understand why leased parking has to be a thing. Like, why does it have to be leased? Why is it that we would have to pay for it in order to have it be public parking? I mean, it's like the only option out there is, oh, we have to lease it and then pay them for it. But in reality, I'm not sure that actually has to be, or it could be some sort of, I don't know how you would even rate it based on leased. You could set any limit you want to what the leasing is. And do we dictate that in the zoning that the lease amount can't exceed, I don't know.
Mark, this may have to do with the whole legal question that I raised before.
Yeah.
And, I think we need to determine whether this is even something that is legally durable,
Well,
before.
I mean, I think it would
We
get
have-
pretty sticky. Excuse me. I think it would get pretty sticky if we went down a leased route, because it would be an undefined amount that they would then need to like make some practical limit versus just mandating a certain number of public parking based on the increased density bonus. I think that seems like a reasonable thing to do. I mean, we were talking the other day about how important it is, how much we would have liked to add a sidewalk down the west side of Bridge Street, but they couldn't do it for a couple of things. One, suspect that there may be unidentified grave markers in the right of way, but certainly also a huge component was a lack of parking, the destruction of the Blue Seal Feeds business opportunity because they would literally have no parking. But if
That's because that's the town right of way. But anyway, you know, that's the town
But
right of way.
it is a town right away, and we could just take it away from them. But my point is that we don't have to if we ensured that they had parking for the business, at least behind the building for some sort of mandated reason, because it's all private property. Theoretically, if you don't
Yes.
go with some sort of leased option where people are paying a lease, and again, those how much and for what is a big question and undefined, but why don't we just allow it? Why don't we just make it part of the option? You know, you get one extra unit per parking space or something like that on top of the 15. I just like the commission to think about that because otherwise you're going to have a lot of trouble trying to regulate that kind of thing. And,
So-
and yeah,
Go
I'm
ahead.
done.
Okay.
No,
So
I'm
we
done.
did try the strategy of guest parking, of saying you have to have so many guest parking spaces for either the number of square feet or, you know, you have to require guest parking. It is not that flies in the face of Act 47. The point of Act 47 was to require to make the towns only able to require one parking space per resident. For whatever reason, and however it's going to work out, that's the law. And I flew the concept of guest parking or requiring that they make just more parking spaces, and that was not acceptable. It undermines Act 47, which says you can only require one space. It's like saying, no, we're requiring actually more than one space.
You're absolutely right.
Units.
Yes, parking is
So-
a dead idea that would never go anywhere and is clearly against the ideas of the law. But a density bonus for public parking is not. That
Well, I
is
don't know about
something-
that. See, I don't know that
Why?
that's
Well,
true, because then you have, you know, then you have
then they
more-
don't take the density bonus. It's an option. It's not a mandate. It's not a government law that says you have to have a certain number like your guest parking option would be. This
Yeah.
is simply saying you want to go up to that 20 units per acre, provide some elderly housing, which was a big hot topic, some unregulated, you know, Yahoo under median income rental, which they say they're already doing, whatever. And I don't pretend to try to understand that, but that one, the and parking, you know, parking is an easy
Well-
thing to offer as a density bonus.
the least parking seemed like it would be something that, first of all, Buttermilk is very unwilling to give up any of their parking just for their future plans. They do not want to give up any parking. So my feeling is that they probably wouldn't take any of these density bonuses
Then they get a
for
50
least parking.
acre zoning. And that's what they want, and that's what they want to live on, then that's what they can do. And they won't have the demand for the parking that they don't want to give up because they won't be able to develop it. You want to just give everything away and say, go ahead, build as much as you want and fill it in as much as you want, the way you want, and give no true incentive to bonuses, density bonuses, then that's what's going to happen. We'll end up with them taking the 20 units per acre and saying, thank you very much, have a nice day, we're off and running. But I don't
Yes,
agree.
we'd have to be willing for that. We'd have to be willing for that to happen, but it gives them an option if their bank then says it's not going to fly if you have to give up these things. So I just want them to have options, which I think any developer needs to have some options as to what they're going to do. We don't ask these kind of things of other developers who come here. And I have to say that when we listen to the developers on the housing committee, they are like, you know, people don't really want to come to develop in Richmond. So I think that is something we need to keep in mind as well. You know, do we want people to come here and build housing or not? Do we want to make it so difficult and so punitive that nobody's going to want to come here? I mean, it's difficult to come to Richmond anyway because it's all hills and floodplain and railroad tracks, and you know, it's not Williston, it's not flat land, so people don't want to come here anyway. There's no possibility of extending the water and sewer. You know, there are many negatives. So, you know, my feeling is, do we want to make this so difficult for people? Anyway. So, Keith, do you want to say anything?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Very good. All right, Ian, you're on. But you're muted right now.
Just to affirm what you just said, you listen to this conversation and people wonder why we have a housing shortage in the state. You know?
Exactly.
And Act 47 is basically taking away our power to prevent people from doing their projects. And, you know, that's the purpose of it, because the projects are not getting done. So, I don't know.
And the legislature.
That's a misinterpretation. I'm sorry, but what Act 47 was a great gift to the developers because it prevented us from requiring the level of parking that we used to.
Exactly. That's what I mean. That's why we needed Act 47.
Oh, okay.
Because any, you know, whether it's, you know, like people who are like, don't want projects in their backyard or have a social justice agenda, whatever it is, they can use these things to, you know, prevent or try to extort concessions from developers, and it prevents things from getting done.
And the legislature feels that it gave municipalities a chance, 5 years, 10 years, to do these things on their own, to make it more possible for these kind of projects to get done, for 3 and 4 unit buildings to get built, for, you know, and it didn't happen. Nobody did it. So that's why they passed Act 47, was to say, okay, you got to allow duplexes. Well, we already did that. That's good on us. You got to allow accessory dwellings. That's good for us. You know, we already did that. But you can't require all this parking. It's unnecessary to require all this parking. And we know from climate change that people are going to have to drive less anyway. So to go with the spirit of that, the only way it seemed to be able to do it was to say, well, you can lease some parking. We can require you lease it. You get the money for it. So to help pay your mortgage, and it will help, because if the Big Spruce people, now if Big Spruce leases 5 parking spaces, 5 of their cars will be out of the public parking and they will be in this parking. So it will help the town in that way. So anyway, Chris.
Yeah, I think I agree with that approach. I mean, we have to, generalizing about the situation doesn't help. I mean, you know, what we're entrusted with doing is dealing with this specific situation in our specific town. And it's not like there are 5 Jolina courts in town and we're looking for developers for the other 4. This is the only property like this in town. And we've been struggling to find somebody to develop it. We did find one. We're now in a relationship with this developer, and our discussions in our terms should have to do with that relationship. because frankly, what we do there isn't going to really affect what happens in other parts of town, because there's no other part of town like this. We do have, is somebody trying to talk?
Go
We
ahead,
do
Chris.
have just the reality also that, I think Mark is addressing, is that our town is not otherwise served in the village by public transportation. So people who don't have a car can't go anywhere else. They have to do what they need to do in the village if they don't have a car. And that's probably enough to keep a lot of people from wanting to live there if that's what their choice has to be. I think we are in a parking squeeze downtown. I don't think anybody would debate that. And what we can do within the constraints of Act 47, which was designed for the whole state, not specifically aimed at Richmond, is to adjust that in a way that makes sense for us. And that's why I kind of like the leasing idea, if that actually is legal. And I think we need to determine whether it is in fact legal before we spend a whole lot more time arguing about it one way or the other.
Yeah, well, if people, I'm interested in finding that out. You are, I don't know, Ian, are you interested in finding out about leased parking as a possible offered density bonus that may or may not be taken up?
No.
I don't want to, pardon me?
No.
No, okay. So Mark doesn't seem like he's interested in it. You and I are interested in it, Chris. Whether Allison, who hasn't been able to join us, is going to be interested in it, I don't know.
Just to be clear, I'm only interested in regular parking.
Yeah, you're not interested in
not
whether
leased.
leased parking is
The
acceptable.
legality of it. Okay, cool beans. As long as you know I am
Okay,
interested in parking.
But I need to ask you, Mark, if you're only interested in unleased regular parking, how do you propose to achieve that if the ways that we just requiring that as part of the zoning change isn't legal, if we believe it's not
It
legal?
has to be density bonus.
Okay,
It's
well, we need to
clearly
check.
not legal under Act 47.
Okay, so we need to
That goes
check.
without saying, and leased parking seems like this convoluted legalese thing that's completely impractical. But just
Maybe
straight up,
what we need to do is ask the larger question, get a legal opinion on what we can do about parking, leased or not, as a density bonus.
yeah, if you want to ask that question, that's fine. I can't imagine that mandating public parking as a density bonus is illegal. But we want to go through the process of asking around. Sure, let's do it.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, so I couldn't say that, but
Yeah, we'd have to ask the town attorney,
Yep.
which we can do. We just can't make end runs around Act 47.
Right.
And, if you want to talk about negotiating with the developer, the last conversation that I had with them is that they're not interested in giving up any of their parking, which might forestall some future plan that they have. So anyway, but we can investigate it. We'll ask Dave Rue, our town attorney, if he sees any way that this kind of thing would be legal. We know that leased parking is legal because that's already in our ordinance, that you can have leased parking. And it is more enticing for the developer to take it if they're going to get something out of it, if they're going to be able to.
Aren't they already getting something out of it with the bonus density?
Well, that's what we don't know, if it is possible to do that legally.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll find that out from the lawyer. Ian.
I didn't fully understand the question before. I would support looking into that. So
Okay.
I didn't want to just be a stick in the
Yeah.
mud. Sorry.
We can ask the town attorney to, we'll have to figure out exactly what we're going to ask him. you know, I don't know if we just say, do you know of any strategies that we can get parking out of this developer? He's not, you know, that's, but we can run something by him, such as this scheme, lease parking as a scheme, density bonus parking, you know, giving additional units for parking. But I do think it is important that we give this developer some options so that they can do something with their project, you know, so that they can get a loan based on what the bank sees as the foreseeable income. All right, so Chris, what do you think? What would you like to see as the sort of base density bonus ratio? Ian would like to see the maximum. He's going for the good. I mean, all of these things are goods, you know, there's something good about them. So Ian is going for the maximum amount of housing, which we know is a good. And the most likely way to get there with this project is to increase the base density to a larger number, flat out. Personally, I'm kind of leaning a little bit towards the 20 because that seems like a compromise to me. We're giving them some increase in base density, which I understand they could just take and go with that. But we're also giving them the opportunity to get to the level that they have stated multiple times that they're interested in by these bonus density units. Even if they elect not to use the density bonus units, that will be a political statement that we've made, that we have offered these and that they have not taken them, but that we are interested in them if it's possible. So that's my position. That's where I would end up at this point, is with the 20 and then some kind of density bonus offers. Chris, where would you end up at this point?
Just looking at the language in the proposed section here, and I'm having a hard time putting my finger on the right section. Hold on.
Are you looking at the Jolina court zoning or the density bonus?
I was looking at the Jolina court zoning. Now I'm looking at the density bonuses.
Okay. And by the way, we only have 5 more minutes on this subject, so we can do our other subject. But I wanted to see if everybody could kind of stay where you're at right now.
Okay, well, I think that as Mark was saying, my preference would be to have no increase in density other than through density bonus, but my addition to that was to make make it easier for buttermilk to increase density than was proposed here. I don't know. I don't have a specific proposal for what that would be, but you know, let's say that we get to affordable housing, that for every, instead of a 1-to-1 situation, have it be a 1-to-2, where every unit of affordable housing allows 2 additional units of density, that sort of approach. And you could do the same approach with parking too, I suppose, if it turns out that that's legal. So, you know, again, not to provide any, you know, any increases in density that don't go through the density bonus mechanism, but to make that easier to achieve than maybe is in the draft.
Okay, so we'd have to come up with something, first of all, that would fly from the developer's point of view.
No, I disagree. I don't think that's what we do, is figure out what they're willing to accept. Well, let's figure out what's legal and what we think we can administer, and then put it in place and see what happens. I mean, that's all we can do. And I feel very strongly about this. If we limit ourselves to only things that the developer says in advance that they will find acceptable, then we might as well just give them what they want right off the bat. What's the point? We are in a negotiation with them.
Yeah, well, I mean, looking at some of the material that comes out of Heinsberg, there are certain things that just aren't going to be taken up by any developers. So
Right.
we just want to avoid that. We don't want to do
Let's be
that.
informed by Heinsberg. I don't have any problem with that. I'm just saying let's actually have a negotiation that's informed by real world experience, but not by what the developer says they want.
Okay. All right. Maybe do you want to work on what you think is something that is an acceptable level? You want to look into that, or?
I can try. I can't give you a promise right now about when I could have that ready, but
yeah,
we'll
I don't think we want to continue this discussion for another year or two. And that topic is hard to formulate, but if you want to go ahead and do it, that would be great. You know, that would be useful information if you want to figure out what you think is reasonable or what you think would work or however you want to look at it, then that would be something you could bring to the table.
Okay, I can do that once we have an answer to the parking legality question.
Okay, well, we'll get that. I'll get that from Dave Rue.
Okay.
Yeah. We've talked to the ACCD people, but they're pretty focused on not doing any end runs around Act 47 and have it be legal. But
sure.
We will have to talk to our own lawyer, clearly. Okay, time for one more quick comment. Bonnie, go ahead. And then we're going to move on to our next topic.
Yeah, I just as a member of the community, I would just speak in strong favor of approaching this as a negotiation and requiring these bonus density units or whatever to increase accessible units, you know, for senior housing, for the potential for something that's less than market rate, you know, some kind of requirement that there has to be a certain percentage that are somehow percentage under market rate. I just think that while I think it's wonderful, the Housing Committee is working on the work that they're doing. That's fabulous. That's all very aspirational, and we don't have very many development projects that are feasible given the topography of our land. So.
Okay, so we will proceed with looking into these couple of items and then try to come back and make some decisions after that. All right, so let's move on to our next topic that we were assigned, if you like, by the select board, which is to look into zoning changes that we might be able to make in the flood hazard overlay district to allow, in particular, the playground structure to be moved up onto the grassy knoll. So we're calling it the grassy knoll. That's up there where the band shell is and the nice little crab apples, bench, and some picnic tables. So
And I assume this has nothing to do with JFK's assassination. Grassy knoll is a thing.
Oh, is that a thing with the JFK's assassination? Oh,
Yes, Magruder.
oh.
Sorry.
Well, we can call it something
Sorry.
else if you want to call it something else. I didn't really know that, but I've been calling it a grassy knoll. A little mound, the bandshell mound, or whatever we want to call it. Anyway.
Call it whatever you want. Sorry.
Yeah. So that piece of ground is actually also still in the floodplain. That's the problem with just thinking you are going to, move things around within the floodplain. It is higher. It has a higher base elevation, but it is not out of the floodplain. So the playground where it currently is is legal because it's existing. It's just that it's expensive to keep repairing it and replacing it and all that kind of stuff. The idea of moving it up onto the bandshell mound is to make it a little higher, a little less damage, a little out of the main flow of the flood. There was no mechanism in our zoning to allow that. So Tyler said he couldn't do it. So anyway, Keith and I worked with Kyle Medash, who's the Department of Environmental Conservation, which is a branch of ANR, and he is the floodplain manager or contact for Chittenden County. So he's the one that has to look at these ordinances and say, that's okay, that goes with what FEMA requires, or that isn't okay and doesn't go with what FEMA requires. So the approach that we took is that you can relocate a structure, especially if it's a recreational structure. You can relocate it from one part of the floodway to another part of the floodway, as long as it doesn't create any additional flood hazard. It doesn't raise the level or the velocity of the water. It doesn't impact any adjoining properties. So that is the approach that we have taken with the piece that you see in front of you, the draft that you see in front of you. Kyle Medash feels, after discussions with him, that that is acceptable, that we can put into our zoning ordinance the ability to relocate a recreational structure from one part of the floodplain to another, as long as you don't do any of those negative things. So that's as far as we've been able to get him to say is acceptable right now. The bathroom question, whether to be able to move the bathrooms up, whether to be able to, there's no allowance for putting any new structures. The playground structure can be rebuilt so that it's actually new. It can be improved to any degree, as long as it only is kind of like the one that we have. In other words, it has the same footprint, the same wood chip area. It has approximately the same number of structures. It looks kind of like that, because otherwise there's going to be a study that will have to be done, a hydrologic or hydraulic or hydrologic, what the difference is, I don't know, but you're going to have to do a study to prove that it doesn't do any of those things. Increase the velocity, increase the speed, affect any adjoining properties, increase the flood hazard. And intuitively, moving it to a higher level actually improves the situation. But because both the grassy knoll and the place where the playground is now are both in the floodway, and we don't want to have to do a study to prove that the grassy knoll has better qualities. We just want to be able to do it. So we've hit upon the language of relocating existing structures from one place to the floodplain to another, that so far has been acceptable. We're still talking about the building, the bathroom and concession stand building. However, there are people out there who don't want that moved. So there's an outreach that has to be done by the 3 Parks Committee to find out if that is actually desired. That building can stay where it is. It doesn't take damage. It's out of the main course of the flow. It gets dirty. It gets filled with water, but whatever. It doesn't take the damage that the playground does. That building is in question, and some people would like to get rid of the bandshell and put a pavilion. Well, that's more problematic because you're not relocating a structure from one part of the floodway to another. You're taking away one, which is okay, but you are putting a new structure there. Now, common sense suggests that a pavilion has less resistance to the flood than the band shell, but a study might be needed if it's a building, if a building is going to be moved. So, so that's where we're at right now. Looks like it would fly with moving the playground. That's, you know, the cheapest thing to do. The other thing that we wanted to make clear is that there are two issues about the floodplain. One is not increasing the flood hazard in any way. We don't want to do that, and it's not okay with FEMA and it's not okay with ANR to increase the flood hazard in any way, which is putting new things in the floodway. The other thing is the question of expense. It's fine, you can leave the play structure where it is. It's just that it's money you have to keep throwing at it to keep fixing it up. So there's two sort of different questions. The expense of keeping things in the floodway, and then the prohibition about increasing the flood hazard in any way. So anyway, Mark. And then Lisa. I'll let Mark go first because
Sorry about that. I was expecting Lisa to get called on.
yeah. Well,
Thank you,
you're
Mark.
on the commission, so I thought I'd give you the first shot at it.
All right. So first of all, yeah, in the summary you talked about in the memo that you sent
Yeah.
out about how removing all zoning in the floodplain is a non-starter. Well, you know, I don't think that was ever the intention of anything that was suggested. The idea that was floated was that a district would be created, a separate district, a park district, with a special flood hazard overlay park district zoning, which is completely legal, would be allowed, and providing the flexibility of a town managed property versus allowing any privacy. Because right now you're looking at changing the flood hazard overlay district, which is all of the town, which is almost all private land actually, but with less consequence to the damage. You know, with a private owner, anything we allow for the park is going to have an impact on private property, which may not be as well carefully thought out as something that's going to go through the review and approval of a select board and who knows how many other people involved in that. So I just want to make sure that the commission understands that that is a viable option. That's a legal option. It's a viable option. I think you kind of poo-pooed it,
But it has to agree to the FEMA regulations.
Yes.
There's no way you can have a district that doesn't
Thank you
accord to the FEMA
leaving
regulations.
Of course not. Of course not. And that is in no means what was suggested or proposed in previous conversations with you. But what I'm asking is that, did you actually talk to, was it Kyle, about what is acceptable development options as far as, can any structures be made? Yes, it's easy to take our regulations and just say, okay, you can add a structure, you can move a structure to a less impacted area, but are you allowed to put any structures in the floodway according to FEMA?
Not new structures.
Not
We
new.
can't-
Can you
We can't
expand-
get rid of the existing structures. The existing structures have a right to be there.
You can't move them.
Well, right now you can't move them. So
You can't-
that's what we added.
So
Was the
no,
ability to
no.
move a
I'm talking
structure.
FEMA regs. Forget our regs. What are we looking at for a baseline for FEMA regs?
You can't put structures in the floodway.
You can't put anything in the floodway. You can't put a picnic table in the floodway.
Nor Phil.
nor fill. Nope, you can't put
You
those
can't
things in
add
the
fill
floodway.
to the floodway. And that's a FEMA statement that you can't
That's,
add fill.
well, that's the guidance from ANR about how municipalities can write flood hazard overlay districts that will comply with FEMA.
Okay. See, that's not the same as what FEMA allows and what
Well,
ANR allows.
Kyle Medash is the one who's going to allow it with ANR as being
And so
compatible
he's
with
saying that
FEMA or not.
we can't
Put
we
new structures.
rewrite zoning regulations for a park district that would allow for a new structure to be put in, like a ball field or a picnic table or a pavilion or a playground. And I say this because there is a growing backlash against remodeling the band shell and converting that over to a pavilion. And if we can't do that, then the space allowed for the picnic table would be kind of weird, because if you put in a pavilion, it's kind of open sided and there can be music that would go in both directions. Keeping the band shell as it is pretty much is unidirectional in its focus to the audience, which would put it basically where the playground is. So you'd be looking at people, sitting on swings through any type of concerts or events that are going on there. And I think there's concern amongst the Three Parks Committee and some of the general population that they don't want to get rid of the band shell, which means that you're moving, and our only option for the playground would then to be move it up to smack right dab in front of the band shell, which would make it very non-conducive to setting up chairs and hanging out and listening to the band while the 3-year-olds are screaming on the slide right behind you.
Well, you can relocate the band shell. Probably. The band shell in the bathrooms are more problematic for Kyle than the playground structure. But it
Right.
may be possible that you can relocate the band shell. And if you can,
Where would you relocate the band shell?
well, I don't know. Where
Right.
do you
Well,
want to
you just tell me
relocate it?
you can't make it any worse. You're telling me that Kyle told you that you can't make it any worse, that's a law.
You're
From
not
A&R
allowed,
that says you're not allowed to increase. So if you move that band shell from anywhere other than where it is, it's going to be an increase in impact.
yeah, I
don't
thought
know
you were talking about turning it around or something. But
just rotating it around. Yeah,
yeah, I don't know.
and then get rid of those trees. That's an interesting option. I don't know what the cost would be entailed in that, and have it point down the
Yeah.
field instead of replacing it with a pavilion. But you're telling me that Kyle says that Vermont A&R regulations do not allow
New structures to be put in the floodway.
of any kind, even though they're accessory structures.
Hmm.
We're not talking about houses. We're talking about fences. We're talking about picnic tables. None of that's allowed according to you, none of that's allowed in the floodway. According to ANR, not our
No.
zoning regulations, but ANR.
No, new structures.
Well, if you were to put in, yes, if you replace the picnic table, you're telling me that ANR says you can't add a picnic table to the floodway.
You're not supposed to. You're not supposed to, but people do that all the time. I mean, you've already
Okay,
put
well,
picnic tables in there.
we're the town, so we're the government, so we can't just not obey the law. So either
Right,
the law says
exactly.
you can't do it, or the law says you shouldn't do it, which are two entirely different things. Is it not advised? Maybe. But considering our options and our limited public space, and the fact that our public space is pretty much all in a floodway,
Mm.
we're sort of limited. And, Do you really
Yes,
think?
we are.
So you're telling me that Kyle says, even if we changed our zoning regulations to reflect ANR and FEMA, we would not be allowed to put in an additional picnic table in the floodway.
Yes, I didn't ask him that exact question about a picnic table. He just said
Well,
no
you
new
talked about any
structures.
accessory structure.
No new structures. Okay, let me let Lisa in on this conversation a little bit for a minute. Mark, yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
Thank you, Virginia. Yeah, I'm recalling one of the conversations probably a couple months ago where a flat cement floor structure, could be embedded in the place of the current playground in the dirt. Doesn't stick up at all above the current elevation of the soil surrounding it. And that could serve as an anchor for equipment that is the current playground so that it wouldn't wash away. And I thought, wow, that saves us from having to move that. It also saves the band shell, which has a lot of fans. That also means we'd have to repair the band shell, but a whole different story. Whatever happened to that? I haven't heard anything since then that we
Well, Pete
could.
was going to research that. I don't know that he's done anything. And
Okay.
flat structures on the ground don't impede
Right,
the water.
exactly. And part of the problem,
So,
the biggest problem.
you can put paths on it, but that's the expense question. Why would you put a path on it, or why would you put a pad on it if there was going to have to be maintenance and so forth? So that's an expense question. That's not a FEMA question.
Second
Flat on the
part.
ground, they claim doesn't impact the flood hazard area. Go ahead, Lisa. Sorry.
Second part of my question. The playground equipment can be bolted to a concrete pad with, studs set in the concrete, taken apart in probably about a half an hour and removed and stored wherever the heck we want it, on top of a mountain someplace. When the flood subsides and goes away and the mud's gone, we just put it back. We don't have to spend anything but labor to do that. And it sounded like a great idea when I heard it, and I haven't heard any reason yet why it's still not a good idea.
Yeah, we were not tasked to looking into that. We were tasked to looking into the zoning. And
Yeah,
I
well,
don't
right.
know whether there are negatives to that, to
Okay.
burying a giant slab of concrete into the ground.
Well,
I
I
don't
mean, concrete's
Anyway.
not free, I know, but okay. then
Somebody
I'm gonna
else
ask-
is going to have to talk about that one.
I'll ask Pete about
So-
it because it seems to me we're going in a circle. We're going to lose something no matter what other of these options we take. We either lose the band shell, or we lose the playground equipment, or something else. So
Nature
anyway, go ahead.
is-
You guys ought to proceed.
got
I'll
its
ask Pete
way.
what the,
So, yeah.
what the latest is on the
Go
cost.
ahead,
estimate
Lisa, and
later.
find out more about that from Pete if you want,
Yeah,
ask
I
him
wasn't-
about
it was
and
not-
ask-
It was not
ask him
clear
if he's
who
looked
Pete was.
into it, or,
It was not clear who Pete was going to report back to, and I haven't heard anyone that he's reported back to. So
Yeah.
maybe he did, and it hasn't gotten out of that other person. I don't know, but I will find out.
we're not really in that chain. So
I guess I'm not either.
we're just in the zoning chain. Jean,
Hi there,
Jeannie.
and just
Yes.
Jeannie.
Jeannie,
And just-
sorry.
My computer, just as we get to this, keeps freezing and stopping. So if that happens, but my only comment is the one thing that I didn't think about until just recently. But if we would move the playground up, it would be closer to the road and closer to the river, and so it would be necessary to put a fence around it.
Yes, it would be necessary to
is
put a
that-
fence around.
So that's all part of something else that would impede
Well,
that's what I'm trying.
right, that intuitively is, but Kyle seemed to think that you would have to have a fence. So
Yes.
if it's okay to move the playground, then we would consider that part of the playground. Even though it's a new structure, you would have
Yep.
to have a fence to put it up there. You
Yes.
couldn't have it
Yeah.
next to the river and the road without having a fence. So,
And just two more comments. The band shell, we haven't really made any suggestions or recommendations, but what we do know is that we'll have to pay an engineer $5,000 to $8,000 just to tell us what needs to be done to that, to repair the band shell as it is. There's steel structures, the crossbars are rotted. There's just quite a bit that has to be done. So that's another it's just investigating all that. So we haven't made any kind
Yeah,
of
and I
decisions
mean,
or recommendations or anything.
right, that's something that your committee will have to deal with, and the public
Yes,
outreach about whether to do that, and, you know,
Yes,
we're just working on the zoning to get
Yeah.
over the hump of not being
Right.
able to do anything
Yeah.
in terms of the zoning. So,
right, right.
all of those things, you know, if you wanted to think about recreating the band shell in a kind of different configuration, would that fly? We don't know. We'd have to find that out. I mean, can you recreate the band shell in a way that is more like a pavilion? Maybe. I don't know that the answer to that question, because we've mostly focused on being able to move the playground structure. So
Yes.
I'm going to go to Bob Heiser and then Andrew Bassett after that. So Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Bob Heiser. I live on Esplanade here in the village, and being a resident of Esplanade, I think I would just want to take a second to just acknowledge that we're at the 1-year anniversary of the major flooding last year. And again, facing flood warnings, and it brings me back to just the thankfulness that we felt and still feel for what I can only call just an extraordinary outpouring of help from people in this community. And like not only the number of people, but just, you know, the right things when people needed it, from people walking down the road with sandwiches and sweets, to a tab run at the hardware store for cleanup materials, just really over the top. And it's in that context, I'm thinking also just on how much is being done statewide to try to make our state and communities more flood resilient. That is disappointing to me to see recommendations of changing the zoning in the direction of enabling more infrastructure and pavement in the form of paved paths, basketball courts, tennis courts, pickleball courts, all are specifically called out in the new edits that are being proposed. In our most flood-prone area, right next to some residences and in the village that are trying to reduce their flood risks. And it seems clear to me that there are two things being suggested in these edits. One is the ability to move the playground from one location to another and to a safer location, which I think seems totally logical and reasonable and in line with the stated purposes of the floodplain regulations. But there are also changes proposed in here that would enable the development of these other forms of infrastructure and hardening. What I see you shaking your head, Virginia, and I can.
Yeah, because no new structures are going to be allowed. It's only currently existing structures that can be moved from one place to another, because we are also protective of the floodway. We don't want to put other things in it. So, you know, as far as things flat on the ground, there's nothing in the FEMA regulations that prevents you from doing that. And maybe we would like to add that in. It doesn't make any sense to us to put any infrastructure, like even flat things, because they're going to have to cost money. But there's no ability to put new things. So I just want to make that clear, that it's only what exists there currently on the ground that can be moved from one area to another.
And
I
so
don't
if
know
we're
if that
talking
helps.
about, well, I don't know of any recreational paved paths, basketball courts, tennis courts, pickleball courts in the flood zone right now. And so if they're not new ones, I don't know why there's proposals for new language to itemize those things in the zoning regulations as potentially being okay under a conditional use where they currently don't appear to be okay during a conditional use if they're not existing, and they're newly itemized. I don't understand why they're newly itemized if they're not making it easier for them to become in the floodplain. And if I can just continue, I think for me, that second set of proposed changes, which doesn't, that language, I just can't see how it's needed to be able to move existing infrastructure. And for me, if there's a new basketball court, new paved path, new pickleball court, anything, new infrastructure, they're immediately going against the purposes of the floodplain overlay that include things like minimizing loss of property, minimizing loss of public expenditures, not enabling impairments to the or the floodplain functions, which hardened surfaces in there would immediately reduce infiltration of rainwater, would accelerate floodwaters over those new hardened surfaces, and at the impact of neighbors, people downstream, the health of the river, and it's disappointing to hear how much we can push or change our existing regulations to make them more lax in hardening surfaces, to push the edges of FEMA when we've seen so much flooding and so much community efforts to try to reduce risk of flooding. There also seems to be a new definition of recreational area, outdoors with structures, that could be a way to look at the entire Volunteers Green as one existing area, so that conceivably new structures could be
No new
considered not
structures.
new. Okay.
No new structures.
And then the last thing I'll say is, none of that language seems possible to move the playground around. And I've been disappointed in various committees that span these proposals of things in the floodway, of very limited input from the public, and a holding up of the fact that agendas and minutes are posted publicly. That should not be held up as truly inviting public input. That is, as I understand it, the minimum required by law. And I was pleased to see last night the Front Porch Forum post that was an addition to the agenda saying, heads up, we're looking at floodplain regulations. I thought they were very limited to the moving of the playground and not considering these other mentions of all these other potential hardening surfaces and additional infrastructure, so that somebody reading that would think, well, if I'm okay with moving the playground, I don't need to dig into these other issues. And I was also disappointed that it was only 24 hours notice. So I think we can do better by our residents and by people at risk in the floodplain. The last thing I'll say is I just encourage, I don't think the community wants a weakening of our floodplain regulations. I would encourage you only to make those changes necessary to make wise movements of existing structures in the floodway and the floodplain, and not enabling these other hardening surfaces and structures. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I just do hope that you come away with the idea that nothing new is presented in these not to be moved. Nothing new, only the existing structures, and the only one that we've got full agreement from the FEMA people about is the playground. The band shell and the concession stand restrooms are more problematic, and we're still thinking about that. So, thank you for your input, definitely as a neighbor, but I do want you to understand that we are not proposing any new structures.
Can you explain then why these new things are listed? Basketball courts, pickleball courts, tennis courts, paved paths.
It's to make a complete definition of recreation areas. What is a recreation area with structures? Already in the zoning was the phrase recreation areas without structures. So this is to give people an understanding of what a recreation area with structures is, which was something that isn't in our zoning.
And so is that, but that's a new conditional use. That's allowed conditional use for a new new recreational area of structures. Well, if you look at the chart of conditional uses, you have a comment on one of them saying that somebody added it.
So Kyle Medash added that from the state, and my comment was no new existing structures. We don't want this. We want only to be. So why he added that? He's the FEMA guy. I don't know, but we don't need to put that in.
Yeah, I would. Yeah,
we don't want any new. All the languages around moving existing structures. So, okay. And
I'm sorry,
since there aren't any of those
to
things,
be clear, Virginia, you don't want any new structures.
Yeah, well, some people do want new structures.
Is allowing it and
Mark
is
wants
making
new structures.
Modifications, and they're within the legal bounds of zoning. Then you are speaking for yourself when you say we don't want any new structures, because I'm pretty sure there are alternative opinions in the community
Yeah,
regarding.
well, you're listening to Bob Heiser, who doesn't want any
I
new
am listening to
structures.
Bob Heiser, and I respect
So,
Bob Heiser. I wouldn't want
Yeah.
a pickleball court in my backyard either.
yeah.
And Mark, that's not fair. That's not fair to call me out as saying I don't want a pickleball in my backyard. What I want to do is not reduce the strength of our floodplain regulations.
I appreciate
Because I don't think it makes
You're right.
financial
I'm
sense.
sorry.
I don't think it makes ecological sense. I don't think it makes sense because I think it increases the risk to others in the floodplain if you increase hardened surfaces in the floodway. So it's not fair to suggest that it's just because I'm a neighbor that it's a NIMBY
You're right.
thing.
You're right,
And
Bob. I apologize. I was
over
out
the
of line.
years,
I was kind of thinking about the development that's going in next door to me and how I'm not really psyched about it, but it's going in anyways because we need more housing, and that's a good thing. And so it's impacting me in a negative way, but it's impacting the community in a positive way. And that was the relationship I was coming with when I made that reference. And I apologize. It wasn't right to call you out at all. That's not the point of what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to make the point of is that if Kyle allowed these modifications of the literature, then clearly there are structures of some type allowed in the floodway, even if in Bob's instance, and probably a fair amount in the community's instance, they don't want to put anything in there. I wonder if basketball court is detrimental to the entire, floodplain ecosystem if we put a basketball court in the park or something along those lines. So my point is simply when the chairman is saying there is no new structures allowed in the floodway, I want to make sure that it is her opinion and not stated law that says we can't put any new structures in the floodplain. I want the commission to understand that difference because it is a nuanced difference. And I do think that people have a right, the whole community has a right to weigh in on this and know what the baseline is. Not what we're being told the baseline is, but what the actual baseline is. And therefore we can make an informed and democratic decision about what we do with that baseline. That's all I'm asking.
okay, I'm going to let Gary and then John.
Okay,
Andrew was next. Sorry.
Right.
I have to go to Andrew Bissett and then Gary and then John. Go ahead, Andrew. You're muted.
Hi.
Hi, that's good.
Well, I got a question as
Yeah.
I've been listening. Have you considered moving the playground to the park that's up by the round church? And then it wouldn't affect the band shell or anything there for concerts or a movie night or whatever you want to do there. And it's up out of the floodplain.
Right. So the Planning Commission really hasn't thought about that because that kind of isn't our area of expertise. We were just asked to think about the zoning. So that would be something that the three parks committee, presumably, who are in charge of thinking about Volunteers Green, Browns Court, and the Round Church Park, that would be something that they could take up. So I would take that question to them. So.
Well, there seems to be a disconnect, because if you approve a zoning owning it and move it up on the grassy knoll, okay, then the parks committee approves of moving it to the Round Church Park, it's still got to come back to you for approval.
Mm.
right?
So, I think a playground is allowed in that area. It's not in the floodplain. But I think I would take that question to the 3 Parks Committee and see what they have to say about it. So,
Okay.
that's more like their area, thinking about that, what they want to do. They just asked us to look into moving it possibly up onto the grassy knoll. So, okay, Gary, and then John.
Okay, I have one suggestion, but 3 quick comments. First, I completely agree with what Bob Heiser said, particularly about the comments about the language that seems to indicate there might be a way of putting a lot more things in the floodway. I know you don't agree with that, Virginia, necessarily.
Well, I'm open to that. I'm open to that. I don't want to make people think that we're going to allow a whole bunch of new things, even though it says existing things.
No.
So if we
Right.
want to simplify that down to the playground word, then that's fine. Then there's the bathroom and the band shell question. But anyway.
All right, the second thing is on the band shell, in January, the select board approved using the ARPA money to get that engineering study. I'm pretty disappointed that the committee's sitting on that. They should be exploring what is going to be the fix to the band shell, because how do you decide what you're going to do with it if you don't have the facts to do it? It's been plenty of time to implement that select board approved expenditure. Third thing is, I think we need a real meaningful vote on item by item on how this money, ARPA money, is being spent in the 3 Parks Committee. I think it's, to me, it's a huge amount of money that is kind of feels like it's monopoly money. That's not real. That's just being spent by very few people, very, very little meaningful input by the public about, I mean, do we want 1 pickleball court? Do we want 4 pickleball courts? Do we want to do something? Do we want to move all the things that are listed? It's like, we don't do this with any other public money. Just let a handful of people in the select board decide that. So Lisa, I'm saying that mainly to you. I hope you require some meaningful feedback, whether it's real votes or some sort of way. Let the public weigh in on that. And then my suggestion of this is that I wish on the bathroom, I know you've focused mainly on the playground, but I think we have one oversized bathroom. There's been talk about having a bathroom up by the band shell area. And I think we should at least allow in this ordinance being able to reduce that existing bathroom by X amount of feet and adding that X amount of feet up on the grassy knoll, that we don't have to move the whole thing to come under this proposed ordinance. So that's it.
So would you actually take away part of that lower structure?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's pretty big for what we need.
Right. Yeah, the Little League people are interested in the concession stand, and the bathroom being there, but 1 bathroom would probably do it, since we don't have to have gender-oriented bathrooms anymore. So,
Right.
Okay, thank you. Yep, John. You are muted, John.
Sorry, it's a filter when I start to ramble or go off on a rant.
Okay.
Fix that immediately. But
The
thank you for the
muting
thank you
filter.
for the opportunity to talk. I guess I certainly would support what Gary just said and Bob Heiser. If you can adjust the definition of outdoor recreation area with outdoor structures so that it doesn't seem to imply that new structures are allowed, I think that would be clearer for people looking at this, next year and 10 years down the road. And with that in mind, I guess I'm curious. So there's an existing trail at Volunteer Screen that's being eaten away at by the river? What if someone says, well, we're going to move that structure inland and we're going to pave it? Is that allowed under these proposed changes? Because we've seen enough of hardened surfaces, the road and even the infield at the baseball fields causing, being vectors for strong erosion.
Well, so right now there's a lot of confusion as to the definition of trails. What constitutes a trail? And we have talked briefly at the Planning Commission, but decided it was beyond what we could do right then about having natural trails versus trails that were structures. Right now, anything is a structure, according to Tyler. A structure is a collection of materials for use. Well, that's anything. FEMA doesn't seem to have a problem with things flat on the ground. That's their way of looking at it. We could try to write it so that natural trails are allowed and structured trails are not allowed. I don't know. I mean, that's an unknown question right now. Whether moving that natural trail that's just dirt, relocating it, you could probably relocate it according to these changes that we've made. Could you rebuild it as a paved? I think that's the kind of thing that the community has to talk about. Is that, because that may not be something that can be controlled by FEMA, or that we need to have controlled by FEMA. That may have to be a discussion that has to be out there in the world. It's like the band shell question. Kind of, do we want this band shell? Do we want to try to not, to have something else instead of the band shell, even if it intuitively would be less of a problem for the floodway to have a pavilion with just posts and no walls? So those questions are still out there and still unknown.
Well, I appreciate your saying that. Yeah, and some of this is frustrating that the Parks Committee that is floating these ideas hasn't given opportunities for substantive discussion of any of these things. So it's coming to you guys to write rules for something that is not fleshed out. But again, we've seen just last year twice the road that goes through the park and the infield, both as hard packed as any path might ever be, were heavily eroded by the rivers. A long, narrow paved path at Volunteers Green. Well, maybe it's ADA accessible, would only make it easier for more people to come and see the erosion of the park and the loss of the park. It's not going to last very long. So to the extent that could be addressed somehow in this regulation, great. If you think it's something that can only be, that's not the role of the Planning Commission, I'll accept that and move on to the next battle.
There is some language about preventing scour in the guidance document from ANR. And scour is something that would certainly be a factor with a paved path. The expense piece is something that is not in our purview. Because you could leave the playground where it is. It's just expensive to keep replacing it. It's an expense. And why people who are concerned about their taxes want to put more expense into this floodway, I don't know. But that's not a Planning Commission question. That's a question that has to go out to the people. And people have to understand that all of these things cost money. We're a small community. We don't have all that money to keep repairing those things, even things flat on the ground, which probably don't, to me, they impact the floodway. I agree with Bob in that it does reduce the infiltration of water into the ground. So that seems like it would be an effect, but the FEMA people don't seem to care that much about that. But there's going to be scour. It's going to be expensive. It's going to have to be replaced all the time. So that needs to be out there. in the discussion. Chris, we got
Thank you.
time for just a couple more. Yes?
I am noting the time.
Okay. Yes. And?
Well, did you, I don't want to cut off if there was something that you wanted to wrap up.
Oh, no, I think I'm good. I mean, you know, we can definitely continue to have this conversation at the Planning Commission because it does concern us. And I would like to disagree with Mark that it is just my opinion that we're very protective of the floodway. Over the last 20 years, this Planning Commission has been very protective of the floodway. So it's important that we do that. Anyway, go ahead and make your motion, Chris, and we'll come back to this.
I would like to move that we adjourn for the evening.
Okay, is there a second to that motion? Lisa, you can't vote. It's going to have to be Mark or Ian.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, seconded by Ian. Are there any objections to adjourning? Okay, so we stand adjourned. Thank you all very much for coming. These are clearly ongoing discussions that we need to move forward, but we need to have this robust conversation. So thank you all. And we'll see you next time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.